Hello, my name is Perry Martin. I'm an independent producer and filmmaker, and I'd like to welcome you to this audio commentary for Sharktopus. Joining me is the film's legendary producing team, Roger and Julie Corman. Roger, Julie, thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you.
Happy to be here. I might mention this picture was originally made for the Sci-Fi Channel under rather strange circumstances. We had had success with a picture called Dino Shark, and they called us and asked if we wanted to make a picture with a title they'd come up with called Sharktopus. And I said no. And they said, why not? And I said, my theory is you can go up to a certain level of insanity with titles like Dino Shark or Dino Croc, which we had done previously, but if you go over that level, the audience turns against you. And I think Sharktopus goes over the limits of insanity. To our great surprise, after we finally decided to make it, it was the biggest success Sci-Fi had had in 7 or 8 years. It was just incredible, both in the United States and when it was released overseas. So it shows that even at my advanced years, I can be wrong. You can still learn something.
Well, you've certainly proven that over and over again throughout your career, the ability to look forward and, adapt.
You're texting again? Huh? Come on, put that down and swim with me. In the ocean? There's fish out there. You're lost.
Roger, you may not remember this, but, well, I know you won't remember this, but we first met April 24th, 1971. It was at the Knickerbocker Hotel in Hollywood, and you were receiving an award from the Count Dracula Society, which was presented to you by Fritz Lang, the legendary director of M and Metropolis and a lot of other great films. Do you remember that occasion?
I do remember that, and I remember something else. A little later on, I had the opportunity to present the same award to Fritz Lang, who I feel deserved it a little bit more than I did.
Well,
I remember it well because Roger and I hadn't been married very long, and he was kind of debating whether to go. He didn't know much about the Count Dracula Society.
Of course.
In the end, it turned out that they were quite serious-minded about, what they were about. And I remember at the end of the evening, Roger being extremely touched to receive the award from Fritz Lang.
Right. Well, what you won't remember is that after the ceremony, I asked you for an autograph. I had just turned 13 a couple of days before, and even back then, I was already a very serious student of your work, and I'd seen, most of your films and most of them many times. So here we are, 39 years, 7 months, 8 days, hundreds of movies, and 1 Oscar later, talking about your latest film, Sharktopus.
Shark! Oh my god!
You're about to see something there. This is part of, I wouldn't say a formula, but a way of working that the Sci-Fi Channel likes. They like to have a shock as close to the beginning of the picture as you can, which is different from the way you'll make a motion picture that is to be shown in theaters. There, our technique has always been to tease the audience and build to the shock. On the basis the audience has paid their money, they're not going to leave.
Right.
And dramatically, it's better to build it up. However, it was Tom Vitale of the Sci-Fi Channel who explained to me that their research had shown that you had to give a shock early on, or the audience or the listeners or watchers or whatever would simply flip the channel.
Well, it's not just a shock, but it's a big reveal. You show the monster, whereas I think traditionally as pictures you save that for maybe 20, 30 minutes into the film.
Exactly. You show bits and pieces, hints of it, and gradually disclose it.
Right. Of course, structurally it's similar to Jaws in that you have an attack at the opening of the film on a woman.
Why didn't S11 go after her?
Because we jerked its leash.
Well, the monster is... one thing I don't profess to be proficient in is anything to do with CGI. It's a little hard for me to tell the great stuff from the not so great.
Right.
So what ended up happening is that Roger was going to be in charge of that, but then various people had their ideas of what the monster should look like. The director, the people who were doing the special effects, anybody who wandered through the office. And so it was a little bit of committee on the monster.
When were the initial designs done? Were they done in pre-production? Did you know what it was going to look like before you began principal?
More or less, but this was Roger's bailiwick, so
All right.
he'll tell you what happened.
The designs were done in pre-production for this reason. My feelings have always been that when you're using computer graphics, they are best in the full shot or long shot of the monster. For the very tight shots where the monster, the Sharktopus, bites somebody, hopefully in the neck or someplace, so it'll be fairly gory, you don't want to go with CGI because CGI isn't quite that accurate. What you want to go with are jaws that have been built and have built-in blood sprayers, as it were. So you're seeing something close to reality. You're seeing the real person screaming in close-up, the jaws closing around them, and blood spurting all over the place. So for that reason, you have to decide before you shoot exactly what you're going to do because you have to build those jaws.
The effect sequences will be storyboarded first?
Yes, on the basis, as I say, and as you look through the picture, you'll see that those close shots are the actual jaws that we built, and the long shots are all computer graphics.
We've just seen the scene there with Eric Roberts and Peter Nelson, and Eric has worked with us on several films, and Peter Nelson actually is an executive at Sony now, but he had starred in a picture that Roger made in the Philippines.
Which film is that?
Roger.
I don't remember. It was a Vietnam War picture. Actually, Peter, there he is.
Peter.
Okay.
Had played leads for us in several pictures. I think 2 pictures in the Philippines and 1 picture in Peru, a science fiction picture we did. He's now gone straight. He's an important executive at Sony, and he came by as a friendly gesture.
What's going on?
S11 isn't responding to commands. Propellers must have damaged the external interface. Told you it wasn't ready for adverse conditions.
Get the system back online now.
It's not working.
So you said that the title and the concept came from sci-fi?
The title came from sci-fi, and the concept came from us on this basis. I said to them, when they said Sharktopus, I said, I can understand when we made Dinah Croc and Dinah Shark on the basis there probably were prehistoric sharks and prehistoric crocodiles. But I don't know what a Sharktopus is. And they said, well, you can figure it out, Roger.
Now, did they present you with a script, or was this something that you developed at New Horizons?
They gave us nothing but the title.
Okay.
So the first thing we had to do was, incidentally, this is a shot that we took a long shot of the Queen Mary and then built that background. They wanted something, shocking scene with the Queen Mary, and we knew we couldn't get on the Queen Mary.
Right.
So we decided to come with these painters here. I've never thought this was the best scene in the picture, but it has a kind of an interesting ending there.
Sure.
But at any rate, on working on the Sharktopus, I tried to justify it, and the only thing I could come up with this, since there is no such thing as a half shark, half octopus, that the Navy needs some device to go into waters where the United States... Here we come. I'll
Right.
be quiet for a moment.
Whoa! Oh no! Not like this!
Not a good death.
Right. Now that we've got rid of him, I'll continue with the origin of the Sharktopus. I felt that with elements like the Somali pirates, terrorists operating with small boats in areas where the United States cannot officially go, that they have commissioned this company, which I call Blue Water, which is obviously a play on Blackwater, that is commissioned by the Navy to create something that can go and kill where the Navy cannot go. Needless to say, as you've seen, something goes wrong. There'd be no picture if something goes wrong. And so here we are now in Mexico, where the key executive, head of it, Eric Roberts of Blue Water, is trying to salvage his mistake.
Any changes?
Hard to say.
There was a picture of the exterior of the lab there.
I wanted to ask about that.
And I really love locations because one of the first things that I did in film, so I always look at every place as a location. You know, what would the sound be like? Is there enough room for lights, et cetera? So I found a great building in L.A., and when they went out to do pickup shooting, they were going to get a shot of it, and the editor found that picture, which had water in front of it, which seemed a good idea. Didn't know where it came from. It was just he found a picture on the internet, and we paid whatever it was to use. And we were at a science fiction film festival in Sitges, and somebody in the audience said, "That building is in Spain. Did you photograph it here?"
Really?
So this is the way things get made now.
It's great architecture, that's for sure. Very distinctive.
Since you let him go 2 years ago.
I didn't let him go, Santos. I fired his ass because he demanded a raise, a big one.
He's a greedy bastard, no doubt, but he knows this water is better than anyone, and he knows what we're up against. If you want S11 back, Andy Flynn is your best shot.
Well, this picture certainly wastes no time getting started. When we're talking about the script and the storyline, I mean, it really jumped into the action.
I think also because Roger, who doesn't really so much like the fray of day-to-day production anymore, comes in pretty heavily in the editing and hardly ever sees a film that he can't tighten.
Now let's talk about the work that's done in Mexico and what went into the decision to shoot down there.
The entire picture was shot in Mexico, in Puerto Vallarta. We had shot there once before. We did Dino-Shark in Puerto Vallarta. We liked the location. It's a beautiful, beautiful place. And frankly, it was less expensive than shooting in the United States. So we could get a bigger picture for the money shooting in Mexico.
We worked with Robbie Russell, who had run the Puerto Vallarta Film Festival, and Adam Feiner was a cameraman who had done a lot of commercials and really did a lot of shooting on the water for them, you know, like promoting hotels, promoting cities in Mexico. And he went out on his own and did a lot of the shooting that you saw at the beginning here, some scenes with water, with, you know, with surfers and so on.
Right.
And he really just loved it and did it. Now, here's a special favorite scene of mine.
Of course, I wonder why.
And I always like Roger with some slight facial hair, but the director had a different thing in mind with the facial hair in this scene.
So you'll see this beach bum is unshaven, deliberately has no makeup, and looks as much. Now, there's a great shot. And needless to say, this beach bum appreciates that shot, and we will see what happens.
Whose idea was it for this cameo?
Declan O'Brien, the director, came up with the idea. We were there, as we always are, during shooting. So he said, "Roger, come out and play the beach bum." And I'd played so many governors and senators, I said I'd be delighted to play a beach bum.
And now the punchline.
You can see I'm fairly casual about that.
Your
Jeff.
interests are elsewhere.
Yes.
Now, of course, this is a sly joke on your well-known aversion for seeing good money go to waste.
Exactly. I've always wondered how people bite into gold and are able to tell instantly whether it's true gold or adulterated.
It also seems like it'd be an unpleasant experience to do that. I've never felt the desire to bite into a coin.
Right.
Of course, this picture does have a lot of production value for a film of its scale. What are some of the secrets of getting the most out of your time and money in a picture like this?
Well, I think we worked with people in Puerto Vallarta who had a lot of connections and who loved making films. And so usually when you find people like that, they bring more to the table than necessary and try to use whatever connections they have. And plus, people enjoy being involved with the film unless they're, I guess, living in Los Angeles and their neighborhood's being filmed every week.
Right.
So we had a lot of people with boats who wanted to let us use them and, just kind of couldn't do enough. And of course, every kid wanted to be in a scene on the water, and it was fun. There's a little bit of guerrilla aspect to getting it made. And we also use a second unit. And so with the second unit, there's ability to get, somebody who's working as an intern goes and gets to be the assistant camera person, or, does a little stunt, or, rides the boat, and, stuff that they don't get to do at home when they're, whatever they're doing.
How would you compare the process of permits and just the logistics and getting cooperation from the local authorities working in Mexico to working, let's say, in Los Angeles?
Well, I think working through people who were well known there, that they were careful because they didn't want to burn bridges, so they were careful to do things the right way, and there were no particular charges for permits, and there was a lot of cooperation.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
One of the things about Puerto Vallarta, which we knew from the first picture and even from before where we had vacation there, which is one of the reasons we chose it, is the fact that it had so many different locations. You have beautiful beaches there, the marina, which gives you good production value, some hotels that we photographed, and there's a jungle and mountains nearby, so you were able to get all kinds of different looks.
Just almost wherever you turn the camera, you get something good to look at.
Yes, here's an example.
Right. What can you tell me about this location?
Well, it's a kind of a lagoon that's down at the beach, down from where we are in the jungle that you'll see later, where Sharktopus decides he has to follow some people he's after. And there were hotels. There's on one side of this is a very luxurious hotel, and then here's more beachy that's been around for 30, 40 years.
Right.
Classy. You Kingsbury?
Well, the locals call me Pez.
I imagine working in Puerto Vallarta it's not an unpleasant location to work in.
It was great to work in, and also we found a number of local actors.
Right.
Both of the actors in this scene, the guy here, I've forgotten his name, and the girl who's an American who lived down there, who had actually gone to the University of Southern California Drama School.
Yeah.
So we got a good actress there to play this small role.
He was a Marlboro man,
Oh, I had forgotten that.
now living in Puerto Vallarta.
It was a joke.
Joe!
That's right.
And this is Hector Jimenez, who's a kind of well-known Mexican comedian.
You're lying. A creature fitting this description was sighted just last week in California. Now it's in Vallarta.
Typically, how much time do you have to spend in pre-production on a picture like this?
Well, from the minute that you start writing the script, you're thinking about where are we going to shoot, what are we going to use, and especially since we had shot in Puerto Vallarta before, we knew what we hadn't used, and thought, well, let's, take advantage of some of those locations. And then as the screenplay is developed, you're thinking about where it's going to be shot and mentioning to the writer, oh, we could use X, and then it gets incorporated. So in a way, that's already pre-production. But I'd say heavy, pre-production. From the time you have the script and you're ready to get started shooting, about 6 to 8 weeks.
There's a lot to be done in that time.
Oh, yeah.
Now here comes our daughter. Everybody works when we're on
Anybody who
vacation.
shows up. This is an intern in the office, and he spoke a little Spanish, so we sent him down to Puerto Vallarta. And our daughter just came down to visit her for a couple of days and said, yeah, I'd love to go bungee jumping. And I was like, as a mother, I'm like, no, I don't want her to. So fortunately, on the day of the bungee jump, the safety officer went to lunch and didn't come back. So now you'll see the scene, and I'll tell you what happened.
Okay.
Seaweed rafts?
Sure.
Okay, you're on.
Had she ever bungee jumped before?
No, and that's why she wanted to do the scene.
Wow.
Yes! Nice! Babe, that was awesome.
I can't believe I did it.
Hey, who's afraid of heights now, huh? Not my girl.
Wait, I want to go again.
Wild child.
Now you're about to see a scene that got one of the biggest reactions.
She's kind of like a worm at the end of a hook.
Exactly.
Yeah.
This is a shot.
Good. So what happened was the safety officer didn't come back, so our daughter didn't get to do the bungee jump after all, and that was a double. And then when I saw what it was, I was like, thank God she didn't do the bungee jump. What would the safety officer have done if anything went wrong? But according to Sci-Fi Channel, that shot is one that gets the biggest reaction in the film.
Is that right?
And we had a trailer for the picture on YouTube, and it got over 1 million hits, and that was sort of the key shot. As a matter of fact, Jay Leno put that shot on his show one night. The origin of that, incidentally, was simply location scouting. That scene was not in the script. As we were looking around in pre-production for locations, we saw that, and Julie and I simultaneously said, we have to use that, and the shot became obvious what it was going to be, so we had to make up a little scene leading to the key shot.
Okay, here.
What?
A souvenir from Baghdad. Piece of shrapnel from an IED. One back here. Played ping pong with my insides. Going for Santos over there,
I'd actually like to talk a little bit about scheduling. I know it's not the most glamorous part of filmmaking, but it's certainly a crucial stage in the process. What goes into scheduling a picture like this? How do you break it down, and what are your considerations?
Well, some of the considerations are things that are expensive. So if there's an expensive actor, you try to schedule in such a way that that actor is used for the amount of time you have the actor for. The other thing is to try to schedule locations that are close to each other, close to the time that they're being shot, so that the company doesn't make a move. Even if you pack up every night and come back, somehow when you go to a new location, everybody has to get a little bit familiar with it, so you lose a little time. And on, these schedules, which are like 4 weeks or even a little less, an hour here or there can make a great deal of difference. So we try to make sure that there's a company move the least amount of times possible. And then there are other things that are like, when is the boat available, or when is the Fiesta going to be on that you're going to... So once you kind of put all of those things on, into the computer and begin to move them around, which is much easier now than it used to be with the production board.
Right.
Which used to be my specialty. In fact, there was a T-shirt made up for me that said, Julie has the board, because I was always trying to figure out some better thing to do. And then the other thing, of course, that we schedule for, which is good, is a second unit that works. So the second unit will work with actors who are available when they're available, or in this case, boats when they're available.
I might interrupt to say that Ralph Garvin there is acting his heart out, but guess who the audience is looking at?
So how this girl got cast is that I went to coffee with a friend, and she pulled up her cell phone and said, "Look who my son is dating." And that's Shandy. There she is.
And what is it with all this? What do you call it?
Sunshine?
Yes, sunshine. Enough with the freaking sun already. It's annoying. What do you got here?
Tell you in a sec. You are live in 5, 4, 3.
She has a good way with humor, and she and Ralph Garman, I think, play off each other very well.
Right, they have good chemistry here.
But he campaigned to get in this picture. He was determined. to have an encounter with Sharktopus, and he did. You went on his show, didn't you, Roger?
Yes. As a matter of fact, he's very funny. He ad-libs very, very well.
Octopus would be 8-armed and dangerous, right? Oh, well, Stephanie apparently is hitting the tequila a little early today, and she's not sharing with her captain.
Back to scheduling for a moment. I know that you have a lot of practical considerations when you're putting together a picture like this and planning how you're going to do it. Do you make any effort to shoot in sequence at all? Is there ever, is that ever a consideration, or are you just forced to forget about that?
It is a consideration. You try to shoot in sequence, but you never fully shoot in sequence. For instance, talking about scheduling for actors, Eric Roberts was obviously the most expensive actor in the picture. He runs all the way through the picture, but we hired him for 1 week only and had to schedule all of his shots within that 1 week, shooting 6 days a week on location. But it's spaced throughout the film so that he justifies his billing and his more or less a star status.
You have a lot of locations in this movie. It must have been a challenge to get all of that in.
It's stretched by second unit. See, all of this is done by a second unit. So
I'm assuming the stuff earlier in the picture in Santa Monica was second unit as well. Yeah.
It was.
The actual long shot in Santa Monica was second unit. The close shot on the beach where the girl dies was shot in Puerto Vallarta. Generally, your second unit will be long shots, establishing shots, and shots maybe where you have to go a long distance to get it, and you don't want to spend time sending your entire crew out on a 2-hour drive to get a shot because it's beautiful, but you can send a cameraman out to get that shot.
You're no fun.
So what makes you think it'll come back here?
Well, when you spend your days gutting fish, you learn a thing or two about marine life.
Were you both on the location for the duration of this production, or?
Not for the whole time. We generally go to make sure that things get off to a good start, and we were there for over a week. And then we go back if there's any problem. But in this case, we had a fairly experienced director, very experienced director we'd worked with before. And, Eric Roberts is a sweetheart to work with, and everybody seemed very congenial, and things were going forward. And we also had the production team we'd worked with before.
Having been a director myself, my feeling is, as a matter of fact, look at this boat. That was a fairly expensive boat, and I think we were able to hire it just for a couple of days and use it throughout the film. But anyway, having been a director myself, my feeling is that during the shooting, the director and the production manager should really be in charge. And the producer's job is to bring everything up to the first day of shooting, then step aside unless there's a problem, but then come back in for post-production.
Checks just make it more amenable.
And you get a sense from some directors that they would be more comfortable if you were around and kind of pushing things a little more. But Declan's kind of his own assistant director, even when there is an assistant director. So, he's a very sort of powerful presence. So,
well, let's talk about him a little bit. What did he bring to this picture?
Well, I like that he brings humor to pretty much anything he does, and I think that there's a fine line between what Roger talked about as being over the top and way too silly, and not. And I think he does a really good job of walking that line. I mean, for instance, he had the idea of Roger being the beach bum, and just as we go along, there are like little things, amusing things that he came up with which if I see, I'll mention, little pieces of business with actors that had some meaning for them, and it puts the actors at their ease also. And he has done some acting, and he has done some writing, so the combination of his kind of being a forceful director who kind of moves the set on his own, of his being here, you see with the humor. And this girl, I like her particular brand of comic malevolence.
Yeah, no,
and
she's really good in this movie.
The story at all costs, right?
Yeah, no, she's really good in this movie.
But, he had to take these 3 actors who are all kind of come from all a little slightly different direction and make them all seem very believable in that scene. And I think that's what he did. And you just do that every scene and every day. And there it is. So to me, those were some of the strengths that Declan had. And plus, good with organization. And you don't always get that. Sometimes the director just wants to work with the actors and counts on production to be doing all of that. But he's very quick on his feet to say, if there's a problem there, we can shoot this instead.
So he came to the set very prepared.
As prepared as you can be, because things are always going to, especially, as a Mexicoan. So some people don't have quite the same attitude about showing up on time.
Hola, señorita.
But what Julie said about the humor, this was very carefully worked out. We didn't want this to be a comedy, but we didn't want it with this title to be a totally serious picture. So with Mike McLean, the writer, and with Declan, the director, and with Julie and me, we had a number of discussions, and we said this should be a straightforward science fiction horror film, but it should be done with humor, but the humor must never overwhelm the story. And I think it was a great credit to Mike and to Declan both that they were able to bring that off.
It's a formula that you've followed many times in your career.
I've always believed that every picture should have some element of humor in it. If you don't give the audience something to laugh at, they may laugh at something. There's a great shot. They may laugh at something you don't want them to laugh at.
So Mike McLean is a little unexpected because, his writing, because he's fairly mild-mannered, rather serious, and he teaches creative writing, and then he comes up with things like like that.
Right.
But,
that's something you don't see every day.
But I think, in the hands of another director or another writer, it might have turned entirely camp, or here we go. That was something that was really wanted, was the Sharktopus getting that Volkswagen.
What sort of limits did you have from Sci-Fi since this was made for television? What kind of content limits did you have in terms of,
They have a lot of information that they give you about what they want because they know what their audience wants. And the really surprising statement that they made, in fact, is that 47% of their viewers are women.
Really?
So they don't break it out by why are the women watching it, but they are. So that,
I guess the why doesn't matter so much as the fact that they're there.
And they don't like supernatural, and they like humor, but not to be a full-out comedy. So those are some of the parameters, some of the things they mentioned. And then of course they like something happening every 7 or 8 minutes.
Right.
So they particularly like the bungee jumping snap of the Sharktopus at the end.
We sure our freak did that?
Now, one of the challenges of this picture is all the shooting that you've done on water, which has to be one of them.
Shooting on boats is the worst possible. I really, and yet Declan loved the water. So that was fortunate because I really don't like it too much. I always remember the first movie I did where I shot on a boat, Ingmar Bergman had just done a film that was all on the water. I've forgotten the name of it now, and I remember reading an interview with him saying the absolutely worst shooting is on water. It's just, you don't have the control. The matching is difficult, the bouncing up and down of the boat and so on.
And then just having a platform to put the camera on.
Platform is the key word. Having shot on water a number of times myself, the worst thing you can do is have the camera on one boat photographing another boat, because the current is always taking one boat in the wrong direction in relationship to the other boat. And I mentioned that to Declan, and I told him a trick I've always used, which is not to go on two boats, but to put the camera at the end of a pier. So you're locked down with the camera and then let the boat maneuver around the pier, but never seeing land on either side, so you get the impression that you're in the middle of the ocean. And Declan did that very efficiently. You'll see some shots where you really are out there photographing, but most of the shots of the boat were shot from the end of a pier.
I would also imagine that if you've got a camera on one boat and your subject on another, that the motion between both boats would be enough to make you seasick pretty quick as an audience member. I imagine that the developments in technology over the last 10 years have really made that kind of shooting a lot easier. Cameras are smaller, you need less gear, probably smaller crew. Am I wrong about that?
Yes, you're right. The lighter, more flexible cameras and equipment make that much easier. This scene, I might mention, although it plays well within the script, was not in the script. We were a little bit short on time, and we had to shoot, I remember, 2 scenes when we were back from Mexico. You'll notice you only see them on the beach in this, and you never see any part of Mexico or anything beyond it, because we actually shot this scene at Malibu.
I wondered about that because it is, and characteristically, bouncing back and forth between close-ups. I wondered if
What
there
happened?
was a reason. Yeah.
Where'd all that production value go?
Yeah, I did wonder, and you do have a wider angle at the end,
yeah.
I believe, when the scene wraps up. Maybe this is it.
Notice you're always just looking out. You're just seeing the beach.
Right.
You're not seeing actually the parking lot to the right.
Well, one beach pretty much looks like another.
Now we're back in Mexico.
I see.
Yeah.
I think this girl's terrific. She's used a really good performance in this film. It's very funny. She seems to strike just the right note for this character and understand the balance, that you were talking about earlier between kind of seriousness and fun as well,
The girl you love to hate.
Yeah. She's kind of like a female Carl Denham, from King Kong.
Yes.
Or a Geraldo Rivera or something. What would you say your average of setups per day was on a picture like this? There's an awful lot of coverage.
I'd say we were probably averaging 25 to 30 setups a day with first unit. But at the same time, for at least half the time, we would have a second unit working independently of first unit, and the second unit could get more shots because they weren't looking for performances and weren't shooting close-ups on actors. They were shooting primarily long shots, scenic shots, so we could go faster. Sometimes we had, and you'll see this more in the big action sequences, we would have second unit working with first unit, so we would have a key scene covered from 2 camera angles simultaneously.
What the hell? Pez?
I'm sorry.
Now, I'm assuming almost all of the interiors in this picture, except for the scenes in Blue Water Labs at the beginning, are all practical locations.
They are.
Yeah, they're not.
And Blue Water, we created that.
Where did you shoot that?
In a room in a hotel.
I see. Oh, really?
It was a conference room, and the art director was very proud of it.
Did you shoot that in Mexico as well?
Yeah.
Or did you really?
Yeah.
Oh.
We got all the technical-looking equipment we could find and just stacked it around the room. There's a certain amount of improvisation to shooting a picture like this on location.
Remote control gizmo, and you guys jockey it back to your yacht if your gear really works.
Now, a shot like this, for instance, where the boat is tied up to the dock there so you can photograph it.
I see.
As long as you're shooting out to sea with the ocean in the background, you can be working off a dock, a pier, or something like that.
Now I'm ready. Patch him in.
Guess what I just saw on CNE?
S11 looks impressive on TV, doesn't it, Commander?
Let's talk a little bit more about Eric Roberts. He seems to really enjoy his time on screen.
Eric was very, very good because he knew what was needed here. He needed somebody who was sincerely playing this role, playing it seriously, but letting just a little bit of, maybe I shouldn't say humor, a little bit of irony coming in, because he knew there was humor in the picture, yet he was playing a serious character who had to blend somewhat with the humor in order simply to make the picture come together as a unit.
He was also very nice with the young kids in it, the girl who plays his daughter and the employee who doesn't really want to work for him. He was really nice to the actors, very. And wherever he is, he's always giving his best as an actor, and I really admire Eric Roberts.
He seems to be really having fun, though. Every time the camera is on him, he seems to really be enjoying what he's doing. And that respect reminds me a little of Vincent Price. You know, every time he entered a scene, it looked like he was ready to have fun.
There is a similarity there in the fact that both of them were playing serious roles, but letting just a little hint of, as I say, ironic humor, or however you want to describe it, come in. Here is one of the few shots that we shot actually underwater. I'm not a great believer in reality underwater for the simple reason that you can see that the images are not clear. In our previous picture, Dino-Shark, we found an aquarium with a glass wall, and we were able to shoot through that glass wall, and the underwater work was much better.
The aquarium wasn't available on this one because one of the dolphins was pregnant.
Oh, really?
Her space couldn't be invaded.
Now, Roger, your first film as a producer was Monster from the Ocean Floor in 1954. Now, 56 years later, with this movie, you've done another sea monster story. It sort of brings you full circle, doesn't it?
Either full circle, or maybe we've never changed.
You've done several horror pictures that were centered around water, Piranha, Humanoids of the Deep, to name a couple of them. What is it about the ocean, the water, that makes for such a potent setting for a horror film?
I think there's a primal quality to the ocean. We came from the ocean. Now, I don't know how much of that is embedded in our unconscious, but I think the ocean has all kinds of unconscious meanings to people, and I've consistently used it. And it's interesting when you say Monster from the Ocean Floor was my first picture. We shot the whole picture at Malibu, and interesting enough, the background was supposed to be Mexico. Now we were able to go to Mexico. Incidentally, Monster from the Ocean Floor, my original title was It Stalked the Ocean Floor, but the distributor who bought it from me said the title was too arty, and he changed it to Monster from the Ocean Floor. It never occurred to me that It Stalked the Ocean Floor was an arty title.
Well, the picture made money, so perhaps he was right.
It may well be.
Talking again about water and what it means, I know you're a student of Freud, and Freud postulated that the water equal the subconscious. I'm assuming that, you know, even in a picture like this, that element comes to play somewhere.
I think it does. Nobody knows what's actually in the unconscious mind, but I think it's a reasonable theory.
And in a film like this, we have monsters sort of lurking in the depths of the water as well. So there's some kind of resonance there.
Yes.
What do those monsters represent, Roger?
Well, the monster to me in all of these films is a representative of our fear of early man. We weren't there when dinosaurs were there, but we were there where mammoths, saber-toothed tigers, and so forth. And the fear of those creatures has been with us since human beings existed. You can go back to Beowulf. The first, you wouldn't call it a novel, but the first story ever written in the early Anglo-Saxon language was a monster story. So the concept of the monster has been with us from the beginning.
And of course, in literature, it goes back to Jonah and Moby Dick, and in entertainment up through Jaws and this picture.
Oh, yes. There's also a certain sexual connotation to the monster. Matter of fact, we play that quite a bit, as you've seen a fair number of pretty girls in bikinis getting eaten by the monster. You can make what you will of that.
Is that mine?
Damn it. You better not have any diseases.
Well, burns when I urinate. I shouldn't be concerned.
Now, typically, how many crew members would you have on a boat for a scene like this?
Oh, on the boat?
Yeah, I mean, you've just got a cameraman and sound. Is there much more than that?
An assistant cameraman, and probably the assistant director.
Because it's a very small space to be working in.
But the others, they weren't so lucky.
They knew the risks, Nicole.
Dad, S11 is a killer.
Now, that's when the boat is actually at sea. Again, of course, if you have the boat next to the dock, you have your full crew standing on the dock.
You have more flexibility.
Either working or sunning themselves.
Well, I imagine there was a little bit of that that went on in this picture. It was certainly a lovely location. I'm sure the cast and the crew took every opportunity to enjoy it.
Yes.
The BioWare, I should have been consulted. This isn't right.
It's time for you to grow up.
Now, what format was this picture shot on?
This was shot 35 millimeter. Sci-Fi has a theory that I don't necessarily agree with. They want all of their pictures shot in 35 millimeter because they feel that major motion pictures are shot in 35 millimeter, and since these pictures are clearly not major expensive motion pictures, if we shoot in 35 millimeter, it will have the look of a major motion picture. I pointed out to them that Avatar was shot digitally, but they wouldn't change their theory. They would, however, when I mentioned that, actually I'd mentioned it earlier, said that we could shoot the CGI shots digitally on the basis, as I said, we're going to have to treat them digitally anyway. To put the creature in, we might as well shoot them digitally.
Is that the way you wanted to make this picture, digitally?
I would shoot.
If it was up to you.
Yeah, it was up to me. I would shoot every medium or low-budget picture digitally. The digital cameras are lighter. They're more flexible. In some ways, you have a better exposure than with motion picture film. It's also, as I say, faster, easier to work with, and it's cheaper. You just have the digital disc rather than having film, going to the lab, having to develop the lab, and so forth.
You certainly had the advantage of being able to view your rushes right away and know whether or not you got what you needed.
Yes, you've got it right there.
Are you able to work with smaller crews as well?
Yes. Now, that's something that predates digital, going back to the early films. When I shot, say, Monster or It Stalked the Ocean Floor, I had a big Mitchell NC, which was the standard at the time. It was a big, heavy camera that required two men just to move it around. It was so heavy. One of the things that's been of great advantage to filmmakers that even before digital, cameras got lighter, more portable. We were able to use smaller crews, and with digital, it's just one more step forward.
Right. Well, you with the Pope pictures, it was a very formal style, very traditional, and then you sort of broke away from that in the right afterwards. That with the Wild Angels, where it really did have more of a guerrilla style look to it, and handheld and cinema verite and all of that.
Deliberately, with the Pope pictures, I was shooting with a 35 millimeter Mitchell, the big heavy camera. I wanted that solid look. When I moved away from the Poe pictures, which were all shot in the studio, and went out in the streets, I stayed with 35 millimeter, but I moved to the Aeroflex, which was a lighter, more portable camera.
Santos, take the helm. I'm going to take a shot at it. Got it.
Roger comes in the post-production and the editing pretty heavily. And you mentioned how everything, moves forward. The person who seconded Roger for the Academy Award was Mark Goldblatt, who was the head of the Editors Union. And he told me without Roger, there'd be no MTV.
I was shooting a picture called The Trip about an LSD experience. And here you can see we have a lot of pretty girls in bikinis. And so
more production value that's relatively cheap, but certainly attractive to look at.
Yes, inexpensive production value.
That's right.
But I used very rapid cutting. I think you can never say you were the originator of anything, because there's always somebody who will say, you're forgetting the 1921 German expressionist film.
Even if you never saw it. Right?
Even if you've never seen it. But as far as I know, nobody had ever cut as fast as I did during the psychedelic sequences. I was having shots that lasted a quarter of a second, and the picture got a couple of awards actually for the editing technique.
Well, this picture moves very fast visually, and of course there has been a big evolution in filmic style from, let's say, the early days when you began making motion pictures to today. What do you think has driven that? Do you think audiences process information more quickly, and that sort of drives the filmmaker to stay up with their speed?
I think they do. I think it's a product not only of audiences with motion pictures, but simply the culture we live in. Everything is faster, and you can just look at people with computers and look again at MTV and so forth. It may well be, and there are theories about this, about the attention span has become shorter.
Right. They certainly are less patient,
yes.
I think, for a film to get going.
Tequila's on you guys, and I'm super thirsty.
Where's Bob?
I don't know. He was just right behind you.
I think it was the film Serpico, in which the guy and the girl live next door to each other, and they say hello, and the next thing you see them, they're in the bedroom. And it's like, wait, what happened? And suddenly I realized, well, like you said, it goes faster now.
Yeah,
you don't need a lot of explication.
Notice that there are either few or no dissolves in this film. I don't remember exactly. I think there isn't a dissolve in the film. You look to films made 20, 30, or more years ago. Between scenes, you will generally see a dissolve, and very often, for a longer period of time, you'll see a fade. I haven't seen a fade in a picture in years, and you'll see very few dissolves. Everything is a direct cut now.
Yeah, because the audience
just wants to go for it.
It doesn't need it.
Yeah, yeah.
There is a theory that goes back a little bit to Godard, the French director, and partially to the fact that on his first picture, Breathless, he was not an experienced director, and he really didn't shoot all of the connecting shots that he needed for the sequence. So he decided just to jump cut, and it became the fashion, and it's the way we cut now.
Well, it does seem like almost anything goes, and I sort of think that an audience, they buy what they see. You don't need to make those bridges so much anymore, and they'll accept what they're seeing while they're seeing it. At least if it's entertaining.
Yes, let us hope it's entertaining.
Right.
Defense Department contracts. Enough cash to go all Frankenstein and create our fish.
So, Roger, do you enjoy the editing process the most? If you have to look at the entire process as a whole, what would that be the stage that you find most satisfying? Or
the editing process and working with the script, because you have control there. With the script, you're sitting in your office, or you can be sitting on the beach, but somewhere it's just the script and you. In the editing process, you have, again, a product that you can work with directly. During shooting, so many extraneous things come in that things get out of control. A simple thing like you shot 3/4 of a scene in direct sunlight, and the clouds come in unexpectedly, and you have to correct for that in some way and shoot some, as we used to, a bridging shot that suddenly you're in shade when you were in direct sunlight.
Your father did what?
And what about you, Julie? What's your favorite part of the process? What do you enjoy the most?
I like the fray of production. I like casting. I find developing the script is excruciating, very, very difficult. I'm always thinking the very thing that I say, let's get rid of that, is just the thing that is going to really be needed.
Right. You like the energy of production.
But I mean, I like working with writers, but I always feel reticent to object, and so that's difficult. But I love casting. I love the whole fray of production, getting all the different characters together, by the characters, I mean the crew.
Right.
And then finding the locations and, just getting the right deals on equipment and getting the film. There was a lot of back and forth of how to get things into Mexico, like the giant practical tentacles,
Right.
What are we going to say those are for? Well, okay. So I find that all interesting, and I particularly like working internationally. I like finding a great location And like when we were in Puerto Vallarta, the shooting for the first film, and it was like a lot of things we saw were like, okay, if we come back, we're going to use that. Like you'll be seeing the jungle in a few minutes.
Right.
Here. Ralph Garman.
Thank God.
I think Julie is right. While you can work with more control in pre and post production, there is an element of excitement during shooting, which can't be duplicated.
How do you think you complement each other as working partners?
Well, I loved the part I just declared, Roger, I'll do everything except you have to do what I tell you to do. So start by getting the script done. And, then the editing and the CGI. I don't want to say anything I didn't want to do.
You're happy to delegate to your partner.
Exactly. It was beautiful, and he did it. So for me, it was great. I don't know. How about you, Roger?
Well, I agree essentially with everything you say. I would add probably the original idea, the concept, and then solving problems. For instance, on this picture, when Sci-Fi said Sharktopus, and I said, what is a Sharktopus? And they said, you'll figure it out. I mean, it took me a little while to figure out what in the world can I do to explain a Sharktopus.
Roger was very concerned with the logic of Sharktopus, how it came into being. I wasn't so concerned with that, but he was, and like he won the physics prize his freshman year at Stanford, but said he didn't understand quantum mechanics, and he said the professor told him, well, anybody who says they understand it, they don't understand it. So Roger wasn't happy until he created something understandable logically for why there was such a thing as a Sharktopus.
Right.
The rest of us just went, it's Sharktopus.
Well, do you think an audience needs that, Roger, to accept the action of the picture?
Yes, I think they need something. It need not be perfectly logical, but because they want to see the picture.
Right.
They want an excuse to believe. So you give them something that is kind of okay, and they'll say fine. However, after that, you must be logical. You say to them, okay, we've got this Sharktopus, it can do this underwater, it can do this on the land, and so forth. But you can't say at the climax of the picture, oh, and by the way, it can fly.
Right, so you set the parameters and work within them.
Yes.
Right, right.
Are you still worried about that shark we saw?
It wasn't a shark.
Look, babe, relax. It's a big ocean. No matter what it was, we're not going to see it again.
You do sort of get the feeling that sometimes when you see films, that people make, that they do have the attitude that anything goes. Well, we do need the monster to fly at this point, so by God, he flies, and it does take you out of the picture. And there's no suspense, because then when you feel like anything can happen, you really don't understand, the guidelines of the film.
I've seen that. You can't, of course, tell on television, but I've seen that in theaters, and the audience just groans.
Right, right.
Maybe on television they flip the remote.
Right.
Check your map. You'll notice the distance between S11's attacks are nearly equal.
How do you figure this out?
Back at Los Arcos. Wasn't sure.
And now you are?
Nope. But I'm sick and tired of chasing the freak around all day, so if I'm right, he'll come to us.
You're in no condition for diving.
I wasn't planning on it. We can lure S11 to the surface without using the tranks.
And how do we do that? Ugh.
What?
Now, this kind of stuff here, even though I know that's all special effects, it still gets me a little bit when he's throwing all that.
I know.
I know that's nonsense, but
right, it could be strawberry jam or something. But in fact, if it is, I would like you to tell me, because it is disturbing to look at it.
Come here.
God, did you get a fish? Come on.
I'd like to talk a little bit more about CGI, since this picture relies so heavily on it. I know there are a lot of advantages to it, and you can do things that you couldn't do back in the days when Paul Blaisdell was making rubber monsters for you at AIP. But do you find that CGI sometimes seduces filmmakers into focusing a little bit more on playing with their toys than they do with telling the story?
yes, I think CGI computer graphics are wonderful. and they can be a great help to the filmmaker. However, I think sometimes the filmmaker becomes so involved with that he loses a little bit of track or pays a little less attention to the narrative. You still start and end with the story, and the computer graphics or any special effects must be at the service of the story, not there for their own sake.
It seems like that's the pattern with any new tool that's introduced into a movie. There's a period of time where filmmakers have so much fun exploring it that they sort of lose sight of, they let the tail wag the dog a little bit.
That's right.
I mean, I remember when the zoom lens came in, everybody was zooming, to the point where it made you dizzy.
A Steadicam.
Right, all of that. Let's talk a little bit about your relationship. You are one of the industry's most successful producing teams, but you also have one of the most enduring marriages. What's the secret to the success of both? Long pause. Do you have different ideas on this, or?
It's like I told Roger that he had to do everything on the film that I didn't want to do. He's going to turn this over to me.
Actually, as we...
Maybe he thinks it's safer to turn it over to you.
Well, we're just about to have our 40th wedding anniversary.
Oh, congratulations.
Mm-hmm. So I actually consulted a friend who's been married longer than we have, and I said, what did you give your husband for a 40th anniversary present? And she said, oh, no, I asked him. He answered the phone. I said, what did Dina give you as a 40th anniversary present? He said, I don't remember. I said, oh, that's not a good answer. So I got Dina on the phone. I said, what did you give her for a 40th anniversary present? She said, oh, we gave each other a new backyard. Well, I mean, it seemed that it just went so fast, and we were very busy, and we still want to be with each other.
Yeah.
Yes.
I've heard Roger tell the story of how you met, and I'm wondering if there's any difference in your version.
No.
Yeah.
No, I was looking for an assistant, and I offered Julie the job. She turned down the job. So then I asked her to dinner, and she said yes to dinner. Now that's one of the few shots where we use computer graphics to actually kill the person. It was not a close shot. If it had been a close-up, it would have been a practical.
Julie, how long after you got married did you start working at New World with Roger?
There was this film, Boxcar Bertha, that I had found the book for. That they wanted, AIP wanted another women gangster picture.
Right.
Roger had done Bloody Mama.
Right.
And so I ended up working on that because...
So you found that property?
Well, yeah, I did.
Oh,
I found the book.
okay.
And I had, of course, my idea about what it was about. And then people came in and kept changing it, like the writer and the director.
Oh, right.
So I really kind of enjoyed that. But then it was really at the start of New World, there was a lot to do. And Roger I remember Jonathan Demme saying about his directing, he said, well, I was just talking to Roger about this film because he had produced, and he said, and Roger said, and you'll direct it. And Jonathan said, and I went, oh, yeah, sure. So Roger didn't really say that to me. He just said, I'm really busy with running the distribution, and will you watch the money on this picture? And I was like, yeah, sure. And then he said, well, we need a director. And I was like, oh, okay, well, I'll call Marty Scorsese and see if he can recommend someone. And so I don't know. I didn't, it wasn't exactly laid out. You're producing. It just kind of went step by step.
What are your memories of the early days of New World around the offices? What was it like to work there?
There was a kind of sea change that happened because in the beginning, in order to, the concept, as I understood, was that it would be a distribution company, and Roger had actually been in distribution to some degree before, that would build to the point where it could finance pictures that he directed. he didn't really like being told certain things by studios and would rather,
I wonder
run it
which
his
studio
way.
we're thinking of.
So,
and having your pictures recut.
So the first pictures were fairly kind of straight action exploitation, and they did well. Then there was this kind of sea change that happened, I think, in 1972 when Ingmar Bergman had produced the first film. Before that, Svensk's film, I think, had been his producer. And so he went looking for how the world was divided. What did he need to get from the U.S. and Canada in order to, mean that he would make back his money at the end of collecting the money from each territory? So the agent called Roger and said, I'd really like you to look at this film. And Roger said, no, I don't need to look at the film. $70,000. No studio will put it up.
This was Cries and Whispers?
This was Cries and Whispers. Mm-hmm. So once that went out, it was sort of like, because everybody likes to kind of, it's easy if you pigeonhole things like, whoa, wait, this and that too.
Right.
And then I think that what happened then was that a lot of the important international directors wanted to come to have their films distributed by Roger because they knew he was sympathetic, he had been a director, he admired their work, and they felt safe and comfortable and like he would give them a good deal besides everything else. So it was Fellini and Truffaut and Bergman and Kurosawa.
And they're the kind of films that would get lost in a major studio. They wouldn't get the kind of care that you would provide.
Well, the kind of care that Roger provided was sometimes extremely unconventional, as when he decided that it would be a good idea to play drive-ins with Cries and Whispers. And Ingmar Bergman sparked to the idea, and then it actually played on a double bill in a drive-in, and I think in Tennessee with Jonathan Demme's movie. So it was very exciting. So the whole atmosphere was like anything can happen,
right?
And all the people who were coming through. And then as Roger got to the point of making, 10, 15 movies a year, it was just sort of like there was almost a production line of people coming in being interns, and the next day they were in the art department, or the next day they were an assistant director, or they were in the editing room, and then they could show their talent. They had a place for it. It was there, So how many people do you hire when you're making 12 to 15 films a year? And everybody's always looking for who's good at what they're doing and who can do something more. And I guess the prime example of that is how Jim Cameron was discovered.
We were doing a picture, Battle Beyond the Stars, which was our most expensive picture. It was a science fiction outer space picture, and we had a lot of special effects. And in post-production, everything was going very smoothly, but the special effects were falling behind schedule. So I had my ace assistant, Gail Ann Hurd, go down to the studio. Our studio was in Venice and our main office was in Brentwood. And I said, spend a couple of days there and tell me why we're falling behind on special effects. And she came back and she said, your head of special effects is good, but he doesn't quite have the experience, he said, when he got the job, which is not unusual, incidentally. But there's a young guy there who's making models, and he really knows what he's doing, Jim Cameron. So I went down to the studio, talked with Jim, and I don't do this often during production. I said, Jim, I'm giving you a raise, and we're giving you some additional responsibilities. And it was interesting. He showed brilliance right from the beginning. And the result, of course, is Titanic, Avatar, and so forth.
You've worked with so many young filmmakers, Roger, many of whom have, had their first professional experiences making movies with you. What are some of the most common mistakes that a young filmmaker would make?
I'm not certain there is any one. One of the mistakes, and it's really a misunderstanding, is not knowing the importance of pre-production planning. Unless you've been through it, you sometimes have the feeling you just go out and start shooting. You don't. There is so much work to be done before you shoot. And one of the major things I teach, or at least talk to new and young directors, is the importance of having everything worked out on paper, hopefully, or at least in your mind, knowing that you'll never follow it exactly. There'll always be a problem on the set, or you'll get a new idea or something.
So you have to have a plan, but you have to be flexible at the same time.
That's it exactly.
This girl, this dancer, speaking of, using whatever's there, she's married to the second unit director. It's like, my wife is a dancer. But okay, well, tell her to bring her troupe in.
And this is one of the more outrageous moments in the movie.
Yeah. I think that new directors, if they haven't been in an editing room, they are not so clear about what they need to shoot in order to cover the scene.
Mm-hmm.
And another thing that I think is very, very difficult for a first-time or second-time director is figuring out about the pacing, because, you may be shooting part of a scene one day and the rest of it a week later, and yet you have to bear in mind the build of how that's going to work. So.
Do you find that having a lot of coverage at that point gives you the opportunity to maybe manipulate that a little bit in editing?
Well, definitely.
And that if you don't have it, you're in trouble.
Definitely gives you flexibility in the pacing, but I think pacing is a hard thing to be cognizant of all the time.
That's one of the things I've noticed with directors who've been editors. They always get full coverage of the scene.
Mm-hmm.
They've been in the editing room so many times and said, if only the director had gotten one more angle, I can cut this scene, I'm in real trouble. They make certain that never happens to them.
Or sometimes just hold a shot for a second longer or 2 seconds longer can make a big difference.
Yes.
When you were starting out, what was the hardest lesson for you to learn?
It was hardest for me to learn to work with actors. I had a degree in engineering, and I felt I learned the technical aspects of making motion pictures fairly easily. Planning, working with the camera, understanding editing, and so forth. But I had no experience in working with actors, and I didn't know exactly what to say to them. Mm-hmm. So I enrolled in Jeff Corey's method acting class in Hollywood. Jeff was one of the best, if not the best, coaches in method technique. And it was from Jeff that I learned a little bit more about acting.
This is where you met Jack Nicholson, too, wasn't it?
Yes, Jack Nicholson was the best actor in the class.
He was better than you.
He was considerably better than me. Also, Bob Town, who started writing several scripts for me, was also in the class.
Of course.
Actually, Jack Nicholson made the best comment of all the night Roger got the Academy Award, which was he lifted his glass of champagne and said to Roger, "Thanks for believing in me, Roger, when none of the rest of them did."
That's a nice tribute.
Mm-hmm.
We certainly kept him going for a number of years. God knows if you hadn't been there, Jack might have become a real estate salesman or something. We were the one that was hiring him.
Well, I didn't realize he was a writer as well. He wrote a couple of scripts.
Yes, he might have been a writer. He was very talented, and he wrote, I think, 3 or 4 scripts for me. He wrote The Trip, which was a major success. He could have had a career as a writer, and also as a director. He directed, I've forgotten the picture he directed, but he did a good job as a director.
Drive, he said, was one of the films that he did, and I think he did the sequel to Chinatown as well, Two Jakes.
That's right.
I think was a picture that he directed.
Oh, for Two Jakes, he called me, and he said he wanted me to play a lawyer that he was going to outwit in court. And I said, Jack, why do you want to outwit me in court? I would have liked to have played
Probably
it.
because you couldn't do it in real life. But
Right. But unfortunately, we had to go to Europe, and I at the time, I wasn't able to play that role.
Jack always tells a funny story about when you were working on The Raven, how his 3 major co-stars, Boris Karloff, Vincent Price, and Peter Lorre, assumed he got the job through nepotism because his last name was Nicholson, the same as James H. Nicholson, the co-head of AIP. I don't think that was the case. But
Not at all.
What? Dad, it's here.
See, the scene like this is difficult because the actor is shooting at nothing.
Right.
And nobody is twirling him around there. But he must give a performance. Now, in the close-up, again, as I say, we used a practical.
Right.
But in the long shot, it's all special effects.
Yeah, that's still in Mexico because we didn't want to deal with bringing it back and getting it through customs.
When did you begin post on this picture? Do you start editing during production?
Oh, right away.
You do.
Mm-hmm.
And Roger, are you involved at that stage reviewing the materials?
No.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, I very seldom actually get into the editing room.
Okay.
Our general technique is to have the editor make a first rough assemblage. The director then gets the first cut. And that's what normally happens at a studio, and the studio starts to come in at that point.
Mm-hmm.
I never do that. I always tell the director, somehow I'm too busy to look at his first cut. He better do the second cut himself. I think the director should have at least 2 tries at the editing before anybody else comes in. Then I start to give notes, and I always say to them, pay attention to my notes, but these are not orders. They are suggestions. Follow what you think is right. Ignore anything I say that you think is wrong.
What sort of areas do you think you're the most helpful with in those moments?
Probably pacing, as Julie said. I like a fairly fast pace in a film. You hear about directors and producers getting into arguments. I've never had an argument with a director, maybe because we make low-budget films. Everybody's trying to do the same thing. We're trying to do the best picture we can. And in most editing decisions, after trying several versions, it becomes obvious which one is the best. Matter of fact, I remember one time I produced a picture with Peter Bogdanovich, St. Jack, which won the grand prize at the Venice Film Festival.
Sure, with Ben Gazzara.
And did very well. And Peter had a percentage of the profits, and when pictures were starting to come out on DVD, and they would have the director's cut, Peter called me and said, why don't we send out the director's cut? And I said, but Peter, the picture was the director's cut. You and I were in complete agreement on every cut.
Well, so often you see now DVDs marketed with the uncut version or restored footage, and it's not always to the benefit of the film.
That happened to my brother on a picture called The Big Red One, where Sam Fuller directed it. It went to the Cannes Film Festival and got very good reviews and was a major success. Somehow, people knew that Sam had an earlier cut that was longer. And I think Sam was dead at this time. There was sort of a feeling that they should restore Sam's original cut. And they did. And it became clear that it was not as good as the final, and they didn't understand that Sam had made the final. He himself knew that what one time he thought was the original cut was too long.
And he wasn't there to speak up for himself at that point. I see.
What are you planning?
The root bottleneck's upstream. I'll cut it off there.
What about my story?
No names, no interviews.
Then what the hell do I get?
Exclusive footage of Sharktopus getting shot to hell.
Now here we are up from the lagoon into the jungle, and this is a great location.
Oh,
the
it's
minute
beautiful.
we saw this, we're like, yes, we're gonna.
Oh, it's a great place to stage your climax.
Yeah.
And again, we saw
So this is the zip line.
the zip line, and knew that had to be in the picture. You will see in a moment why.
Now, is this another resort, or what is it?
This, weirdly enough, was built for the picture Predator, and it was then turned into a resort.
The zip line and restaurant.
Roger, making movies used to be much more expensive, and as a result, the power to do so was centralized with the major studios. Today, the new technologies have made it possible for almost anyone to make a movie, and you see pictures coming out of all kinds of corners of the country and getting distributed, some of them, and making money. What do you think of this new democratization of the industry?
I think it's wonderful. It brings us back to the fact that motion pictures are an art form and a business, both. Too often the business end of it overshadows the fact that it is also an art form. And as we return the making of films to the filmmaker and away from the executives. Not that I have anything against executives, because I've worked with major studios, and most of the executives really do know what they're doing. But I think it gives more autonomy to the filmmaker. I paused there for 1 minute because it was a great shot
Right.
of a killing.
How do you think the competition from that sector of the industry will affect mainstream Hollywood?
I think it's already affected it. It's divided mainstream Hollywood into one type of film which is fairly daring and experimental, and another type of film which harkens back to the old days, which are now the tentpole pictures, the $100,000 20th version of Batman or something like that, which are always technically well made, but frankly, they're tailored by the studio distribution organization.
It's corporate product.
It's a corporate product, exactly.
But I think the majors kind of co-opted pretty much anything the independents can do. They have their low-budget divisions, they have their straight-to-video, they have...
But don't you think that this sort of competition from that sector of the marketplace is exerting downward pressure on the studios in terms of the costs that it takes to make a movie? I mean, if you can buy a picture for $100,000 that costs $30,000 to make and release it to $20-30 million profits, it seems to me that you have less of an incentive to spend $100 million or $200 million on a movie.
That's true to a certain extent, except the studio has to be able to buy that film because they can't, with their overhead, make it. So what happens, there are maybe 100 people making an extremely low-budget film. One out of the 100, if you're lucky or brilliant enough.
Maybe one out of 1,000.
Maybe one out of 1,000 exactly will be picked up.
Right.
But that's okay. How many novels are written in relationship to how many are published?
Right, right. What do you think this development bodes for theatrical distribution? What do you see the future there?
Theatrical distribution, again, is divided into two types of film. You're seeing the giant tentpole pictures, and you're seeing the smaller experimental pictures. For the simple reason it's tough to experiment with $100 million. The studio doesn't want you to do it. That's why I admire particularly people like Jim Cameron and Christopher Nolan, who've made pictures like Avatar and Inception, which are brilliant original films. But you can experiment more and take more chances with a lower budget film.
Do you miss the days when all of your pictures opened in theaters?
Definitely.
You do?
I believe a film should be shown wherever it can be shown through any medium, but I still like the idea of going to a theater and experiencing a motion picture with an audience.
Of course, it does seem that it's migrating more towards home entertainment. You started in the business at a time when television was really giving motion pictures a run for its money, and home entertainment's really doing that again. It seems like the viewership is really migrating towards the home.
Yes, that's true.
I'm going to draw it to you. Go!
How much time would you allot in a schedule to shoot a climax like this? You've got a lot of action and...
We shot up in that location, I think, 4 days.
Okay.
And again, this would be the type of picture where you bring your second unit together with your first unit, so you're covering each one of these shots from two angles.
I see.
This is one of the more spectacular
high point,
deaths.
yes.
This is the death everyone's been waiting for from the beginning. From the first moment they saw her.
I love her. She was so much fun. I almost hate to see her die. How long did it take your CGI contractor to create all this stuff?
It always takes forever.
Oh, really?
That's the problem. Roger actually edited the trailer that's online that's had, millions of hits. And I said, too bad you don't have all of the CGI yet. But they did have.
So you had to go with what you had to create that trailer.
Yeah.
And
I don't
not
know.
all the effects were in.
I don't know, Roger. Why does it take so long?
I don't know, as a matter of fact. I don't think anybody knows.
I think it's some mystique that they tell you so that they get paid more money. I'm not sure.
But that's happened on every film we've done with computer-generated special effects. Every one has gone at least slightly over schedule.
So they missed delivery date on typically.
Yeah.
Well, it's also that you see the effects, and then there's some debate as to do you want to make changes.
Right. And then you have to weigh when you need it versus how badly you want that change.
Yeah.
For instance, actually I wanted a little bit more texture on the Sharktopus skin, but we weren't able to do it on the schedule and on the budget, and it worked anyway. So
It looks slimy this way.
yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit more about how technology has changed the business. And, as always, Roger, you talked about how you missed the days of theatrical distribution, and yet you've embraced the future. You recently made a series of pictures for the internet. I'm thinking of Splatter.
Yes, you must embrace what is going on, and you must look forward to the future. Otherwise, you become obsolete. Julie can tell more about Splatter because she was instrumental in setting that up.
What was the big challenge of that production?
Well, the big challenge was that it was to be interactive. So the idea was that this rock star had supposedly died, and then he came back to mete out justice to all of his would-be heirs.
Right.
First, there'd be a murder, and then the audience would get to vote who dies next. So what do you do with the permutations and combinations of that?
And how much time did you have between one episode and the other to figure that out?
A week.
Goodness.
So the original idea was that in a week, Roger was up for this challenge. We'll do the whole second episode. And I was like, no, I think we have to shoot every combination. So finally, the came around to that was what we did. We shot every combination, and it worked well because now it's being distributed internationally, and there the voting might be different. Than on the Sci-Fi Channel was they showed it leading up to Halloween. So they showed the first episode, then the audience voted for who they wanted to be killed next, whom they wanted, and then the next week that person was killed, and then they voted again, and that person was killed. Well, now for international and other distribution, we have all the combinations. So however they vote, we can give it to them.
I see.
It was kind of a fun experiment to do that. And
did it work as planned?
It did work as planned. And again, we were talking about the director. So Joe Dante was surprised. She said, we can't ask Joe Dante to do this. Joe Dante is going to be way too expensive. Anyway, I said, well, I can ask Joe Dante. So I did. And Joe said, if Roger's in, I'm in. I said, okay. So then Roger goes, now what are you going to do? How are we going to pay Joe Dante? So I go, well, I'll talk to him about it. So I said, well, what do you think? What do you think? And he said, yeah, well, whatever Roger wants to give me is fine with me.
Speaking of Joe, his picture Piranha was recently remade, and a lot of your pictures, Roger, or some of your pictures have been remade or in the process of being remade. What do you think of that whole phenomenon?
I'm not necessarily in favor of it. It's simply an economic decision. Piranha was one of the few films we made where we didn't have the remake right, so we had nothing to do with the new Piranha. We did have the remake rights on Death Race 2000 and several other films, which I thought were well made, and they did have the advantage that they had far bigger budgets, so they were able to get really greater production value and special effects.
With the development of CGI, it seems like it would be a perfect time to update X, the Man with the X-Ray Eyes, one of my favorites of your pictures.
It's strange you say that, because we were at a film festival and they always have these press conferences, and one of them, somebody asked me, of all the pictures you've made, which would be the one that you would like to remake the most? And I said, The Man with X-Ray Eyes, because it was really quite a good story of a man who could see through things, but our special effects were so limited at that time that it was a little bit crude, and today those special effects could be wonderful.
And that's a legitimate reason to remake a movie.
That would be one of the few legitimate reasons to remake a movie.
Roger, you're at a time and place in life when most people would be resting on their laurels around their swimming pool, and yet you're still out there wheeling and dealing and making pictures. What keeps you working?
I love making motion pictures. It's as straight and simple as that.
Throughout your career, you've always had your eye on the future and tried to stay ahead of the curve. I think that's one of the secrets of your phenomenal success. Are there any new horizons for Roger and Julie Corman?
It's nice that you said New Horizons, which of course is the name of our company. There are. And I think the number one thing is the internet. Much as I've said before, I like to see motion pictures in theaters.